order. Welcome to meeting number 33 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Quick housekeeping notes. Today we have MP Stéphane Lauzon, who's replacing, oh no, that's in the second hour. We have Stéphane Lauzon, who's replacing MP Mike Kellaway today. And we also have MP Tony Baldinelli, who is replacing MP Chris Lewis. Welcome to both of you. Bienvenue de nouveau. We're very pleased to have you here today. So just note 2 members and 2 witnesses to ensure an orderly meeting. I'll just outline some rules with respect to interpretation and sound. If you'll notice at the bottom of your screen, there's a globe icon. Please select the language that you would like to listen to. You can speak in any language, French or English, of your choosing. When you are speaking, just please wait until I recognize you by name and unmute yourself, which is again on the bottom of the screen. And once you've done speaking, please go ahead and mute yourself again. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. I do have time cards to help you all keep time. I have this 1 minute remaining and a 30-second remaining that will allow you to keep your remarks accordingly within time. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. We have the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, represented by Krista James, who is the National Director, and Stephanie Tam, who is the staff lawyer. We also have Howie Sachs and Henry LLP, represented by Melissa Miller, who is partner and lawyer. And we have the Vigilange, represented by Stéphanie Bérard, who's the president, and Colombe Marco, who's the coordinator. And I believe that we're waiting for Colombe Marco at this point. But we will go ahead and get started. Each of our 3 organizations will have 5 minutes each to make your opening remarks before we go into our round of questions. We'll start with the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. Please go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me fine? Yes. Great. Madam Chair and honorable committee members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I speak for the Canadian Centre for Elder Law. We conduct research and develop reports and educational tools on legal and policy issues related to aging. You will find many elder abuse resources on our website. Last month, we completed a study paper on elder abuse for the BC Council to Reduce Elder Abuse, and we are presently updating our practical guide to elder abuse and neglect law in Canada with funding from the Department of Justice Victims Fund. We commend the committee for setting aside time to study elder abuse in Canada. I will first speak briefly to the sufficiency of existing criminal code provisions and then comment on some other prevention and response issues within the federal jurisdiction. First, elder abuse includes different kinds of victimization, which require different policy and legal responses. Roughly, elder abuse includes interpersonal family violence and neglect, financial abuse under a power of attorney or another legal document, fraud, scams, and professional cons, and then finally, abuse and neglect in institutional settings. In terms of interpersonal violence, older people are mostly harmed by people they care about and often dependent family members. And most seniors do not want their child or grandchild to go to jail. They just want the abuse to stop. When they are harmed by con artists, they are more supportive of prosecution. Family members want corporations penalized for neglecting older adults living in long-term care. We concur with previous comments that the existing age-neutral criminal code provisions are largely adequate for responding to elder abuse in Canada. That said, Mr. Webb's proposal from the Advocacy Centre for the Elderly for a criminal code provision on criminal endangerment to facilitate the prosecution of neglect in long-term care merits study. Further, we recommend legal research into 1, the effectiveness of existing criminal code provisions for addressing violence against other populations, such as women and children, and 2, into the US experience with criminal law responses to elder abuse. We are part of a law reform agency at the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, and we believe that law reform is ideally informed by robust comparative research, which allows us to learn from the mistakes and the victories of others. Many US states penalize elder abuse criminally, We need better understanding of these experiences before we follow their lead. We recommend the Government of Canada fund this research. Although criminal code enforcement falls largely to the provinces and the territories, the Government of Canada has a significant role to play. For example, first, law reform in smaller communities across Canada is by the RCMP, which requires funding for better outreach and response. Much of police response to elder abuse is attending on site to provide information and referral. And social worker, counselor, and police detective pairings make for great online support for older adults. Most jurisdictions do not have Crown Council policy regarding how to work with victims and witnesses who have mental capacity issues, including, for example, dementia. The Government of Canada can provide leadership in supporting research and policy development in this area, perhaps by bringing back the Federal Elder Abuse Initiative, which has funded some excellent resource development in Canada. The government could also support interjurisdictional knowledge exchange on this topic, possibly through the provincial territorial working group on seniors issues. Now, while punishment can be very important, we encourage the committee to apply a victim and survivor-centered lens that gives attention to the unique needs of different vulnerable populations in Canada. This approach highlights many responsibilities that are within the federal jurisdiction beyond the criminal code. First, a number of populations who are particularly vulnerable to abuse fall under the federal jurisdiction. For example, Indigenous peoples and immigrants and refugees. Both groups require better support when they experience abuse and neglect, and you can imagine some unique vulnerability here. Secondly, and my final point, the recently passed National Housing Strategy Act codified a human right to housing in Canada. It requires the minister responsible to develop and maintain a national housing strategy that addresses persons most in need of housing, which includes, according to the Canada's National Housing Strategy, both seniors and people fleeing violence. There's only one transition house in Canada developed to meet the needs of older women. And many communities, the only emergency housing for older men is a homeless shelter. The ATIRA report, Promising Practices for Housing Women Who Are Older and Fleeing Violence or Abuse, identified a significant lack of appropriate temporary housing for older women. And more recently, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing has called for a national level leadership in realizing the right to housing for vulnerable populations in Canada. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. James. We'll now move on to Howie Saxon Henry. Ms. Miller, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak today. I am a personal injury lawyer with a focus on nursing home litigation. I sue long-term care and retirement homes for elder abuse and neglect and have been doing so long before COVID. Nursing home litigation is seriously under-litigated in Canada, mostly because the damages in these cases often do not outweigh the cost of litigation. This means that legitimate cases often never come to light because our civil justice system does not recognize the value in our most vulnerable population, our seniors and those with disabilities. Every single family that I represent, several hundred currently, says that they want accountability and answers. That is why they come to me. These families are often caught up in a very complex web of bureaucracy and getting passed around when something goes wrong. They can't get answers from the administrators of the home. The police usually will not investigate. The coroner will most often not get involved, and the Ministry of Long-Term Care here in Ontario, when it does find wrongdoing, rarely enforces all available remedies. As we've seen throughout this pandemic, many families have turned to their MPPs and MPs and the media to get answers and some measure of accountability. At the provincial level, every province has various regulations regarding the enforcement of penalties to a home for violating its obligations under the governing provincial legislation. In Ontario, for example, the ministry has the power to revoke a license from an operator, order a return of funding, and impose various sanctions. And this varies widely across Canada. Often when I see the inspector reports after an investigation, I see things like voluntary compliance and written notice. I've also heard that sometimes a staff member will be fired as a result of an infraction, but it's extremely variable across the board. Even after the abominable atrocities that we heard about through this pandemic, like 26 residents dying from dehydration before the military was able to arrive at one of the long-term care homes in Ontario, licenses have still not been revoked. Fines haven't been paid, and instead we see sweeping legislation across the country at the provincial level providing immunity to long-term care and retirement homes for COVID lawsuits. Another step away from accountability. We are also seeing for-profit chains paying out over $100 million in dividends to shareholders while also receiving taxpayer money for emergency relief to the same tune. This is just unacceptable. Clearly, the slaps on the wrist from the regulatory bodies at the provincial level and the pittance that is paid in civil lawsuits are not making a difference. In the criminal sphere, we have in existence several charges that could be laid against administrators of homes. There's failing to provide the necessaries of life, criminal negligence, and criminal negligence causing death. They've never been used against those who have the most power and control over the lives of the residents, the owners, operators, administrators, directors, and officers of the homes. We've only seen historically some convictions of assault from staff members or maybe a family member in a private context not providing necessaries of life, but we've never held anyone in management culpable of the abuse and neglect in long-term care homes and retirement homes. So this needs to change. The administrators of these homes take on a duty to provide the necessaries of life and are paid to do so. They are under contract. And for the most part, in long-term care homes across Canada, they're being paid with taxpayer dollars. The federal government has the power to control two very important mechanisms that would benefit the lives of our most vulnerable: the federal transfer payments to the provinces earmarked for long-term care and amendments to the criminal code. As with the Canada Health Act, the federal government ought to require provinces to comply with national standards for long-term care in order to receive federal dollars for long-term care. This government has currently pledged $4 billion over the next few years to provinces. If even one single dollar of that money ends up in a shareholder's pocket at the expense of a resident, that would be an unconscionable result. My group, Canadians for Long-Term Care, in conjunction with the provincial and Canadian health coalitions, commissioned a legal opinion from Stephen Schreibman, who drafted national standards for long-term care, and I would be more than happy to share it with this committee. With respect to criminal code amendments, as we've already heard, I know from Mr. Graham Webb, I support his recommendations in specifically to criminalize the abuse and neglect of our most vulnerable at the hands of those who have the most power: the owners, operators, administrators, officers, and directors. The changes would be similar to failing to provide the necessaries of life, like criminal endangerment, and should carry out the same penalties. Accountability should be bookended with appropriate government oversight and enforcement at the front end, and accountability criminally and civilly at the back end. Those are my submissions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Miller. Right on time. I appreciate that. We'll now go to Vigile Lange. If you can please go ahead. Madame Bérard, I believe you'll be speaking for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Merci.
Thank you. Vigile Lange is an organization that helps the most vulnerable. We work with an organization from Cap-Laurentine. It's a complaints organization that works for seniors when it comes to abuse complaints. So to give you an idea of the requests that we get, we actually have 12% of the requests that were pertaining to abuse. Most of the abuse is either financial, psychological, or harassment, people taking hold of a situation, or ageism. We've noticed that there are common denominators that come into play: isolation and factor of vulnerability. Most of the abuse is actually inflicted by a member of the family. Very often, there are also cases of internet scams. We have been referred a number of cases by the investigators and the police services on our territory. Our approach in this type of situation means proceeding very carefully. We have to look at experts and try to get the experts in various fields. We have to also take into account the rhythm that the person will work at and see what can best be done to improve the quality of life. And also we have to establish a relationship of confidence. We want to do whatever we can to make sure they are no longer isolated. We want to inform the person of the services that are available on their territory. The question of vulnerability and consent. Well, this makes the question very complex because somebody might be deemed capable of making a decision, but if they are vulnerable, for example, their judgment could be influenced for fear of reprisal. So we have to take that into account. The person who is vulnerable often feels a great deal of shame, especially when it comes to abuse by a family member. A person actually could have a dependency relationship with a family member. In the case of a child or grandchild, a person can be very careful at the beginning, but the relation can turn into an abusive one for a number of reasons. It could be because of drug addiction, bereavement, mental problems, whatever. And so we have to remember that the most important thing is to take care of the person in need. It is important to create a trusting relationship with the person who needs us. Vigilants are our eyes and ears on the ground because they work closely with the seniors who are in their environment, and they raise our attention when there is a problem. By those people, I mean community organizers. It could be also a hairdresser, members of the community, everybody who is concerned about seniors. So what would be some of the solutions? First of all, more training would be required with regard to abuse, especially for frontline workers. And all of the professionals who have any relationship with a senior should also get extra training. We have to have emergency shelters for seniors who have reduced mobility. In a number of regions, there aren't any such services. We also have to increase awareness of the rights of seniors as well as the resources available for seniors, especially those in vulnerable situations. We have to better define the notion of vulnerability in order to better intervene when they're victims of abuse, and also allow the frontline workers to better react. We need more financing for community organizations who help needy seniors. There also has to be a protection mechanism to protect the victim of any reprisals. It's important to provide psychological support in the medium term and long term to victims to make sure that the psychological health is appropriate so that there is no longer any abuse. Thank you.
Berat. We'll now go into our first round of questions, starting with Mr. Cooper for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll direct my first question to Ms. Miller. Ms. Miller, you talked about the failure to prosecute administrators, directors, officers, persons responsible for overseeing long-term care facilities and instances of abuse and neglect. Now, you cited some applicable sections of the criminal code, including the failure to provide the necessaries of life, criminal negligence. But as you noted, under those sections of the code, officers and administrators are not being prosecuted. What is the reason for that? Do you believe that these sections simply are inadequate and that we need additional laws on the books? I know you endorsed in part what had been proposed at the last committee meeting from Mr. Webb, but perhaps if you could just elaborate a little more on this to provide me with a bit of a better understanding of the lay of the land and what gaps really need to be closed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Cooper. Absolutely. So I think it's a combination of factors. To tell you the truth, the police oftentimes are not quite sure how to investigate these cases. So much of this happens behind closed doors. We have, for example, with child abuse, we have the Children's Aid Society that investigates cases independent. And it would likely be helpful to have an independent body, and I'm not sure how that could be set up at the provincial level. But on the other hand, the police need to be empowered and trained so that they know how to investigate these matters and actually charge those who should be charged criminally. But in order to do so, I think that we need some clarity in our criminal code, which is where I think Mr. Webb's recommendations come into play, because we're not, right now, we only have a precedential value with these criminal code sections as it relates to individuals outside of institutional settings that have been charged with criminal negligence or failing to provide the necessaries of life. And I think if we have some clarity in the criminal code that actually stipulates that the owners, administrators, operators could be held criminally liable, it would create an accountability at the level of the organization before we even have to think about how to implement these sections. I think it'll put some fear where fear should be implemented.
Thank you for that. Now, Mr. Webb noted that in terms of criminal negligence, obviously you have to establish causation. He noted that that can be difficult in a long-term care setting. He also more broadly noted just the difficulty of pinpointing based upon existing criminal code provisions to effectively prosecute someone just who was responsible for the abuse or neglect. Would you care to comment on either of those things?
Yes, I mean, of course, there are some difficulties around that, but I think what we've seen over the last year, while investigations have been underway, is that we do have enough evidence. And certainly what we've learned over the last year with, take an instance of dehydration, that's extremely common in my practice, even pre-COVID. And that's something that is just unconscionable in our society, that someone can actually die from not having water placed by their side. And that's usually a systemic issue. It's the charting is not happening appropriately. The lowest paid staff members don't appreciate the difference or the importance of noting water intake or the placement of a water glass on a side table, for instance. Those are things that happen at an organizational level from the owners and operators. And when it happens consistently or anytime, it should not be the lowest paid worker that is held accountable. There has to be accountability at the organizational level, especially when we have chain for-profit companies turning a profit on the suffering of these residents.
And would you support, I know you focused a lot on directors, officers, and I think you make many valid points in that regard, but just the other two recommendations that Mr. Webb put forward, whistleblower protection legislation, as well as a criminal endangerment section of criminal code. Do you endorse both of those things?
I do, yes. I think both are critically important, especially the whistleblower protection. Again, because we're talking about, the lowest paid, usually racialized women who are working at these long-term care homes that feel like they can't say anything, they're going to lose their job or they'll get in trouble. And we've heard through some of the testimony through the Ontario Long-Term Commission that was actually the case. And we can't have people in fear. Those with knowledge of what's actually going on should not be in fear of holding those who should be held accountable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooper. We'll now go to Madame Brière for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bonjour, Madame Bérard.
Hello, Ms. Bédard. My question is for you. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your clients. What are the causes behind their need for being accompanied? And have you noticed any changes in the needs of your clients over the past few years? And of course, you can add a little bit about COVID as well. Yes, we noticed that with regard to our clients during the pandemic, the level of vulnerability has been exacerbated. We have a lot of very complicated files. There has been a lot of psychological abuse and isolation. The people are dealing with a lot of threats of abuse. It's difficult to accompany the individual if the aggressor is always present because the person can't get away from them. So the question of reprisals or retaliation is a major factor. We have to better protect the seniors who are victims of abuse. There has to be a better mechanism in place to protect them, because they may suffer the consequences of whistleblowing. It's because they don't feel protected. That is what we are seeing on the ground with regard to vulnerability. Very often, the only contact that that person has is with his or her aggressor. There may be financial abuse, psychological abuse, whatever, and it's very difficult for the elder to live with all of that. I don't know if I answered your question, but yes, thank you. We know full well that victims of abuse are scared of negative fallout. Do you have any idea of what could be put in place to encourage them to denounce the situation? Well, we noticed that in homes, there isn't any adaptation for elders who have mobility problems, for example. There are still stairs, there aren't any elevators. So if you take the example of battered women, well, there is accommodation, but there isn't necessarily enough available for abused victims. Perhaps they could be put into shelters the time that it would take an elder to regain his psychological health, and let the whistleblowing run its course. It's kind of like a witness protection program. It's the same thought process that goes into this. So we have to protect the individual and not have them stay in the environment where the aggression or abuse is taking place. Earlier on, one of the witnesses said that you can draw a parallel with what is in place to protect children. When you talk about this with your different partners regarding the rights of elders, have you thought of something like that? Because in Quebec, there are a lot of organizations who look after seniors' rights. So yes, maybe we are close to something. Yes, the Victims Protection Act, or the different mechanisms that could be put into place to protect seniors, would certainly be a good thing to protect their health. That's what we need for elders. We see the situation on the ground. We see seniors who are so unhappy, and they don't deserve to live in isolation. So yes, this would be a good avenue to take to protect these seniors. You mentioned a few things about early intervention or early detection of abuse. In a context where we are trying to promote seniors to stay at home, what could be done to make sure that that detection actually takes place? Well, we are lucky because we have people who are looking out for those seniors. They're all the people who are in the elders' entourage. They call upon us, and they can report a case to us and ask us what can be done to get the elder out of the situation and what can be done to prevent any abuse. So a member of our team may note that a caregiver is exhausted and may actually commit some abuse. And that's when a case like that would be highlighted and we could intervene. In the case of the criminal code, well, this might not be your area of expertise, but do you think that something should be added in the criminal code to criminalize abusive behavior? Absolutely. If there's a case of whistleblowing about financial abuse or assault or physical abuse, well, yes, I think that if action is taken, then it would be a good thing to have in the something in the criminal code. But if you just talk about verbal abuse, or if there's institutional abuse or accountability, who is responsible? Is it the orderly who commits the act, or is it the institution itself? So I think that you have to really look at all forms of abuse, not just financial abuse, for example. You really should reopen the criminal code and include all forms of abuse. That would be a very good thing to do. Thank you very much.
And I noticed that Madame Marcoux has joined us. Welcome again. Really great to have you here. We'll now go to Monsieur Fortin for his 6 minutes. Please go ahead, sir.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Ms. Marcoux. Nice to see you here, Ms. Bérard, and all of the witnesses who have come to join us today to participate in this very important exercise, which is to better protect seniors in our society. I think that we really do have to move forward on this. I really liked what Ms. Miller said with regard to the fact that we should perhaps think about a way to have better criminal measures for the actions or inactions of people who work in institutions. I think they carry a very important responsibility. It could be the orderlies or the nurses or whoever take care of seniors. I think that we have to look into this more closely. I am very interested in what Vigilance does because they are in my riding and they play a major role to help seniors. We heard from Ms. Bérard, and maybe Ms. Marcoux could tell us about members of her team, what they call vigie, overlookers, if you will. How do you train them? How does all of this work, actually? Well, right now we have 156 of these, say, guardian angels. It can be anyone. It can be a citizen. It could be somebody who works in a community organization. It could be police services, health professionals. It's all those who are very interested in the situation of seniors. So the vigie, as we call them, are our eyes and ears. We try to recruit people from the community who deal with our seniors. Because especially when you deal with abuse, it's a very taboo topic. So seniors may sort of confide in a hairdresser or anyone else that they trust. So when we talk about these guardian angels, then they can be anyone who's interested in the situation of seniors. So it could be anyone, really. We won't necessarily tell those individuals what to do, but we want that person to send that person to us so that then we can help them. The guardian angels are sort of like the parents secours, which is parents in case of emergency, who do the same type of thing. So you're talking about people who you recruit who work with seniors. You mentioned hairdressers. There could be pharmacists or other types of professionals. You're talking about sort of a sticker that they can wear. Do the seniors know about that? Well, it's the logo that we have. If you look at what's behind me, it looks like that, and it also has our phone number. So the institution or the member of our team can identify himself. If he or she sees a situation that would be concerning to them, they can tell us about it. It could be a notary, it could be a lawyer, it could be a hairdresser, somebody who works in a school. There's no limit to it, really. Well, let's say I'm a senior. Well, don't laugh, because I am going to be a senior one day, an elder, hopefully. I plan to be around a long time. So I might be a victim of abuse when I'm an elder. But let's say I see that sticker when I go to the pharmacy and the pharmacist is wearing it, then I'm going to be able to say, well, look, my nephew is doing this to me, or somebody else is doing this to me. So I would get some cooperation from them? Yes. What type of cooperation would I get? Well, it's a partnership, really. We listen to the description that is given to us by this guardian angel, and we obviously act only with the consent of the individual. There is a vigie who could see what can be done. There's all sorts of cooperation that could occur. I imagine you work with police authorities as well? Yes. Hospitals? Yes. A great deal. Now, how does that improve the situation for the elder who has, let's say, an economic problem? If there's physical abuse, it's pretty obvious. They're taken to a hospital. Let's say the senior is a victim of, say, financial abuse, and they talk to the hairdresser about it. Well, yes, that is a situation that can occur. We have to take the time to clearly understand what the situation is. We have to go at the senior's rhythm. We have to get all of the information, especially if it's the case of just one single individual that the senior has to help them. It's very delicate. So we have to establish a trusting relationship so that we can then refer that person to the appropriate resources. Thank you very much, Ms. Marcoux. Thank you, Mr. Fortin.
Mr. Garrison, for 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to direct my questions to Ms. Miller, and I thank her for raising the question of holding the least paid workers responsible for what happens in long-term care homes. I think a phrase that I've come to respect is that in long-term care, the conditions of work are the conditions of care. So I want to ask Ms. Miller, in your experience, have you found that the precarious nature of work in long-term care homes is a contribution when it comes to the failings that lead to elder abuse?
Thank you so much for that question, Mr. Garrison. I couldn't agree more with that comment. It's a quote from Pat Armstrong, one of the leading experts in long-term care. I see it, unfortunately, every single day of my practice. I held a series of town halls with my group Canadians for Long-Term Care, and we had PSWs and nurses come on and speak. And I've spoken with countless of them over the last year, and they, Nathalie Steck-Doucette spoke at Parliament Hill at my demonstration, Broken Hearts, Empty Shoes. She's the president of the Quebec Nurses Association. And she said, we're not heroes, we're just nurses. These people are overworked, underpaid, and are lacking the resources that they need to do their jobs. And what I have heard consistently over and over again is that they want to do their job properly. And they are leaving at the end of the day knowing they are not. And it's heartbreaking for them, and it's heartbreaking for the residents. And the reason why it's so detrimental, again, you take these very simple things that snowball into cataclysmic issues, knowing how a resident likes to take their food, knowing that they don't want to come from the left versus the right because of Parkinson's or being hemiplegic. Those are very small, nuanced elements of care that you can't just have, written down in a massive piece of paper. It comes from knowledge. It comes from knowing the residents, spending time with the residents, having consistency of the staff with the residents, rather than having this revolving door of underpaid contract workers who are trying to come in and learn about every single resident on every single shift. That's how things fall through the cracks. And these very small deficiencies in care are what snowball into horrible conditions. That's how we see bed sores that cause, that lead to necrotized tissue developing into bone infection, dying of dehydration, choking on food because they were supposed to have liquid. These are things that are happening every single day across Canada, and it is predominantly because the staff do not have the ability to do their jobs properly.
And do you think that the limited number of hours of staff time to provide care per resident is a big contributor to these problems that we're talking about today?
Absolutely, and that's extremely variable from province to province and territory across Canada. In Ontario, for example, prior to the pandemic, we were at 2.75 hours of direct care per resident per day, and now we're at 2.45. And, the experts unanimously agree across the board that the bare minimum should be 4 hours per day, although we do have some provinces that have, over 5 hours per day or even closer to 6. And that should not include RSW or resident care aid workers. So that would just be for personal support worker and nursing support. It wouldn't include physiotherapy, nutrition, occupational therapy, things like that.
And so one of the possible solutions that has been suggested is to have national standards written into the Canada Health Care Act for long-term care. And I'm presuming I know the answer to this question, but how do you feel about that? Would that help address these problems?
So I am, if you ask, I think most experts, and I have, as I said, I did a series of town hall meetings. Most of us agree that the Canada Health Act should stand alone and that a separate piece of legislation should be legislated, incorporating the 5 governing principles in the Canada Health Act with some additional principles. And the predominant reason why that we need to have legislated standards is where you have standards legislated for healthcare, which is governed provincially, as we know, but that is legislation that's governing doctors and nurses that already have their own regulatory and licensing bodies that they answer to. We do not have the same thing for personal support workers across Canada. And so it is incumbent upon this federal government to implement additional standards that stand alone separately in the legislation that operate exactly as the Canada Health Act does to ensure that provinces are complying with those standards in order to receive federal funding.
And just, we have very little time here. I'm going to ask a question about training. And what are the requirements in most long-term care homes for personal support worker training? Do you feel those are adequate?
I couldn't even answer that if I wanted to, because it's so variable across even Ontario, let alone Canada. And that's the problem. There isn't any standardized training, and it needs, that is fundamental to improving care across the board, is that there needs to be training, there needs to be licensing of these workers, and they need to be paid properly, and they need to be paid in accordance with their counterparts in acute care and hospitals.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. We'll now go to our second round of questions, starting with Mr. Moore for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today. To the Canadian Centre for Elder Law, I mean, this is an important issue at the best of times, and we know with COVID and with lockdowns and everything that we've experienced over the last year, in many cases, it's made bad situations worse. And you have provided a lot of support and resources for seniors. Where we've been talking a bit about the impacts of COVID. I want to speak about something a little different, and it's about the targeting of seniors through scams. And we it's so commonplace now. I know I mentioned to the committee last week that, I received a call that was clearly a scam, and people are getting these calls nonstop. But we know that seniors are specifically targeted. We know that they wouldn't be doing these scams if some people weren't falling for it. So can you speak to some of your experiences, maybe the advice that you give, and how you're supporting seniors for protection against scams?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Moore. We've developed a series of resources called Be a Savvy Senior, which are available in English and French. They include French and English language, animated videos, and also a series of fact sheets. And one of the things that we try to emphasize the most because we don't provide individual assistance, we provide sort of high-level tools that frontline providers can share with seniors. One of the things that we try to emphasize is that seniors are not being approached for cons because they are gullible. And I think there's a tendency out there to treat seniors like they're easy marks because they are not educated enough or they're more gullible than younger folks, which is all mythology. I've been caught, and you've almost been caught, right? Like, con artists are very sophisticated. So we encourage seniors to get some more information so that they can help problem solve how to respond. And generally the best tip when you're being scammed or you think it's a scam is to not respond, right? Because even just saying anything puts you at risk of sharing your personal information. So honestly, seniors and younger people need the same basic information about how to protect themselves from abuse through con artists.
Okay, did anyone else want to comment on that before I move on to my next question? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. And any suggestion now on how those scammers could be better targeted? I know it's frustrating for police because these are international, many times in nature, but do you or any one of our panelists today have any suggestions on how should we be doing more as parliamentarians? Should government be doing more to target those scammers?
I think when it comes to scamming and when it comes to other forms of elder abuse, one of the key things is to provide better resourcing to the RCMP to support robust training and response in communities across Canada. Smaller communities are often less resourced than larger communities. If you are experiencing a scam that involves under a certain amount, you won't be able to talk to a person. Often you're directed to a website where you have to follow a certain number of links and put information in. It's not a very helpful or accessible way to provide information on your experience. And it's not a very elder-friendly way to support people to get help. What seniors need is in-person attendance by RCMP to find out what happened and to support them with their problem. Those relationships in community are what help seniors be safer.
Okay, thank you. I see that the chair just informed me my time's just about up. So thank you all for your participation here today.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. I appreciate that. We'll now go to Mr. Maloney for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. Very informative. I'm going to pick up on something that Ms. Miller said earlier. You referenced, nurses that were overworked, underpaid. They go home at the end of the day knowing they're not doing their job properly. And, the reasons for that have become more apparent, or more widely apparent, I should say, as a result of the pandemic, even though they were apparent to some before the pandemic, as you had pointed out. One of the things that's become well known in the last 12 months is that homes that were operated privately seem to have higher COVID incident rates than those that are operated municipally or by other levels of government. I'm wondering what your comment is on that, and in your experience pre-pandemic, given that you've been doing this type of work for some time, does the COVID example extend to other areas and the level of care in those homes across the board? And if the answer to that is yes, which I gather it is, what are your views going forward on private versus public long-term care homes?
Thank you so much, Mr. Baloney, for that question. So absolutely, yes. I mean, COVID is really just, highlighting what has already been true in the public versus private. I can tell you that, from the Toronto, Ontario experience, our councillors voted, I think unanimously, to put the additional funding into the municipally run homes, as an example, to come up to the 4 hours of direct care per day. That is one of the reasons why municipally run homes are usually run very well in comparison to for-profit homes. And again, speaking of the Ontario example, although I know this is true in other provinces, the funding structures are different, but the funding that comes from taxpayers that goes to care is not the portion of funding that for-profit homes are allowed to derive a profit. It is the portion of funding that is to go to hospitality. That is the portion where for-profit companies are allowed to derive a profit. And what we saw in this pandemic is that older homes with 4 persons per room, we've called them ward-style homes, are the ones that had some of the worst outbreaks. It is not a coincidence that most of those homes are owned by for-profit companies who were the only parties willing to buy out these old buildings, turn them into long-term care homes, and didn't have to really do anything to get people in them because our wait lists are so exorbitantly long, and did not use the hospitality funds or profits to modernize the homes and make them safer for residents. Instead, they mortgaged these properties to the hilt and paid out dividends to shareholders. So I think it's pretty clear where you can see that I stand on these issues. Profit has no place for care, and I take that from the final report from the Long-Term Care Commission in Ontario that was just released on April 30th by Justice Morocco. And we've seen some issues across the board, but the evidence is very clear that the for-profit homes have the worst care for the most part.
Thank you. You kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask you to give us a list of your takeaways from reading that report, because I know that you've probably read it cover to cover by now. But I'm running out of time, so I'm going to ask a question to you and others. Or maybe you could send us in writing the answer to that question, what your takeaways from that are and what we need to know for the purposes of our study and from a criminal law perspective. That would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And then my question is to you and to the others. I mean, we're talking about specific crimes in the criminal code, like failure to provide the necessities of life, et cetera, et cetera. There are provisions in the criminal code that would provide the police authority to charge these homes and the people who run these homes now. It's just not happening. So my question is why. I'm not sure the Children's Aid Society example is on par with this for reasons I don't have time to get into. But my question is this. The crimes in the criminal code that exist now don't apply just to seniors. So are there other jurisdictions in the United States or around the world that you can point to that have laws that address the issues we're talking about that are tailored towards seniors?
I'll say something, Mr. Maloney, since It looks like no one else is going to speak. There are U.S. jurisdictions certainly that have some relevant similar legislation, and that's why we recommend some comparative research into the experience of the U.S. so we can build on what has worked. I think we really need to do that robust comparative analysis. But many of those provisions are still age neutral. They attach to vulnerable victims, not so much based on an age, although some American states do have legislation that specifically deals with only over age 60 or over age 65.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move to our next questioner, Monsieur Fortin, for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Birard, or Ms. Marcoux, said earlier on that it is better to protect the seniors who do some whistleblowing. I was wondering how you could ensure better protection for a senior who does denounce a situation, or for one of the vigies who says, well, I have a victim I know of a victim of violence. How can we better protect them? As I said earlier, the homes for victims of abuse, well, they don't exist. I think it would be important to set up such centers so that they can get out of an environment where they are victims of abuse. That way, we can ensure the safety of the victim. I think that is one avenue that we should explore. The guardian angels who can refer people to such centers. Take people who work with women who are victims of abuse. They have shelters. But if you have a senior who's a victim, they can't go anywhere. Well, I'm going to go quickly because we don't have much time. The other question I wanted to broach with you was the following. There's been the question of how we could proceed with amending the criminal code to try to prevent abuse without necessarily sending the aggressor to prison, because very often it's a member of the family or someone close to the victim. So how could we stop the abuse without necessarily putting the abuser in prison? Obviously, sometimes it may have to occur, but not necessarily always. Well, if there's a case of physical or sexual abuse, then yes, there can be criminal sanctions. But if it's a case of psychological abuse, then there is therapy that is available for the abuser. They can be forced to go through some therapy. Does it happen a lot in your area that people do actually get therapy after they have abused someone? Well, the system isn't really set up for that. Vigilance tries to heighten awareness among seniors. But as far as the legal aspect is concerned, well, that's not necessarily what we deal with. Ms. James, you referred to that earlier. I was wondering whether you had any reaction to that.
Then the translator, Mrs. Chair.
I know, and you had 40 seconds extra to cover that extra translation time. I appreciate it. And if the witnesses would like to provide written responses to any of Monsieur Fortin's questions, please do go ahead. I will now lastly go to Mr. Garrison for 2.5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I know that I've been focused on the extreme cases of deaths in institutional care as a result of COVID, but I don't wish to diminish in any way the seriousness of elder abuse that takes place in other forums. But I want to go back to Ms. Miller. She mentioned the role of the coroner, and we had in the certainly evidence presented to the Ontario Commission that there were a large number of deaths in addition to those from COVID that took place during the COVID epidemic as a result of insufficient care. And she mentioned, I believe it was Ms. Miller who mentioned the role of the coroner and the maybe cursory investigations by the coroner's office of deaths in long-term care. Is that what you were getting at, Ms. Miller?
Yes, my clients have been asking for coroner investigations long before even COVID happened. And in fact, it's one of the only ways that we can sometimes even determine what happened, because they have access to records that my clients don't. And many of my clients who lost loved ones in long-term care homes as a result of COVID are currently fighting with the coroner's office to try to figure out what the actual cause of death was. And they want accuracy and they want answers. They want to know, did my loved one actually die from COVID or did they die from dehydration? Because many residents weren't allowed to go to hospital. So it's very much still something that's under investigation, and it's problematic for sure.
And in these cases that you end up dealing with, where families are seeking some kind of remedy through private law, how would you explain the attitude of administrators and the owners of these facilities? How can they not be aware of the conditions in their long-term care? Is this plausible deniability or willful blindness, or what is their reasoning when they're presented with these cases?
Mr. Garrison, you said it. I think it's tantamount to willful blindness. I don't think there's any other answer than that. You hear the pointing of the fingers at the government, but as I said, accountability needs to be bookended. There needs to be accountability by the homes that have the power, with the government in enforcing, and with actual penalties at the end of it, financial and otherwise, jail if necessary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. So at this time, I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for your contributions to the study on elder abuse. If there are any additions that you'd like to make, any clarifications, please do write to us and to Mr. Clerk for those clarifications. At this time, we'll suspend the meeting briefly to let in our second panel of witnesses, and thank you again to all of the witnesses here for your time. get going on and continue our study on elder abuse, I just want to welcome MP Raj Saini, who is here. Welcome. I really appreciate having you here in our committee today. I will make a few comments for the benefit of our witnesses. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you're ready to speak, ensure that you are unmuted and your mute button is at the bottom of your screen. Once you've done speaking, please make sure that you go back on mute and speak slowly and clearly while you are. The interpretation is available to you at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Select the language that you'd like to listen to. You can speak in any language, English or French, as you desire. When speaking, again, please make sure you're speaking slowly and clearly. At this time, I'd like to welcome our witnesses. We have the BC Care Providers Association, represented by Terry Lake, who is the Chief Executive Officer. We also have the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, represented by Benedict Schöpflen, who's the Executive Director. My apologies if I butchered that. And Kathy Majowski, who is the Board Chair and Registered Nurse. We are also joined today by Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario, represented by Marta Hajek, who is the Executive Director, and Ryan Rideout, who is the Director of Provincial Partnerships and Outreach. Welcome to our witnesses. Each of the organizations will have 5 minutes to make your remarks. I have this 1-minute card and a 30-second card to help you keep track of your time. We'll start with the BC Care Providers Association for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, members of the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. My name is Terry Lake. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the British Columbia Care Providers Association, and I speak to you this morning from the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people in the beautiful city of Kamloops. The BC Care Providers are the largest organization representing contracted providers of long-term care and assisted living in BC. We comprise both not-for-profit and for-profit organizations. And through our operating arm, Engage BC, we also represent private home health providers and independent living providers. Well, I've served in this role for the last 8 months only. I was BC Minister of Health from 2013 to 2017, responsible for seniors care in the province. In BC, long-term care is provided by health authorities, nonprofits, and for-profit corporations, with each responsible for about 1/3 of long-term care residents, of whom there are about 30,000 in BC. It's my understanding the committee is interested in knowing if there are sufficient measures in place to protect against elder abuse, if existing penalties are sufficient, and how the Government of Canada can improve elder protections. This study is aligned with the 2020 speech from the throne, which stated the government will work with the Parliament on criminal code amendments to explicitly penalize those who neglect seniors under their care, putting them in danger. And while I have heard others opine on the current criminal code provisions that speak to neglect, I cannot with any authority tell you these provisions are sufficient, so I will focus my comments on how protection against elder abuse and neglect can be improved in 2 very important ways. The average age of an elder in long-term care is about 85 years, and the majority of residents have multiple chronic, complex conditions that require 24-hour care and monitoring. About 60% of residents have some degree of dementia. For this reason, staff include registered nurses and licensed practical nurses, but most activities of daily living and management are carried out by healthcare aides, or as they're known in Ontario and some other provinces, personal support workers. In most provinces and territories, healthcare aides are graduates of recognized programs delivered by public and private post-secondary institutions, although there are some provinces in which this is not a requirement. In British Columbia, there is a registry of healthcare aides, and any healthcare aide working in a publicly supported seniors care environment is required to be on the registry. The goals of the registry are to protect vulnerable patients, residents, and clients, to establish and improve standards of care, and to promote professional development for care aides and to assist these workers in identifying career opportunities. It's my understanding that BC is an exception in having formal recognition of HCA credentials, but unlike nurses with whom they work, HCAs are not self-regulated although the former government and the present government in BC have indicated the intention to move healthcare aides into the newly expanded College of Nurses and Midwives. The professionalization of healthcare aides is a very important way in which elders in care can be protected. Even if a care aide is found to have abused or neglected an elder in care, they can find themselves removed from the current registry, but they can continue to work in private provided care, and potential employers are not notified of their removal from the registry. A robust self-regulatory college will ensure those delivering care to vulnerable seniors are held accountable for their actions at the bedside, no matter who is providing their paycheck. Another benefit of professionalization of healthcare aides would be continuing education opportunities and increased stature for this important role, which would likely draw more people into this important career. And this leads me to the second important way in which we can prevent neglect of elders in care, and that's addressing the critical shortage of care aides and nurses in seniors' care in Canada. The Royal Society of Canada's report on long-term care recognized that this was the first thing that we can do. We all heard terrible stories of the situation, particularly in Ontario and Quebec in the first wave of COVID, in which elders were found to be dehydrated, often sitting in clothing that was soiled. And that was a result of the lack of care aides available to work. Many were off sick, many were afraid to come to work. But this healthcare challenge has been recognized for many years. So I think if there's one thing that we can do is address the health human resource challenges in seniors care and invest as much as we do in seniors care as our peer OECD countries, which invest about 30% more than we do in Canada today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for that. We will now go to the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse to speak today. We commend the committee for its decision to develop a study on elder abuse. So as mentioned, a few months ago into the pandemic, our country witnessed horrifying accounts of abuse and neglect in many long-term care homes. 2 reports that were published recently documented the appalling conditions that residents endured. Outside of long-term care homes, older Canadians have also borne the brunt of this pandemic through deaths, social isolation, and decreased quality of life. This year brought ageism and elder abuse to the forefront. Elder abuse was rampant in our communities long before COVID, and the abuse is not limited to long-term care settings. Elder abuse has been a silent pandemic for years. From a 2015 national study, we learned that the prevalence of mistreatment was 8.2% among Canadians aged 55 and over. That's over 750,000 Canadians. Mistreatment includes physical, emotional, sexual, and financial abuse, systemic abuse, neglect, and the violation of rights and freedoms, like interfering with spiritual practices, denying privacy, or preventing visitors. CNPEA is one of the many voices calling for this issue to be recognized and addressed at the federal, provincial, territorial, and local level, with an emphasis on prevention and early detection through a collective and sustained effort. Like domestic violence, elder abuse is a complex issue that requires nuanced responses because older Canadians are not a homogeneous group. Layers of identity such as gender, race, sexual orientation, economic standing, and disability have a direct impact on a person's risk of victimization, their ability to report, and to access adequate services and justice. If we're serious about tackling elder abuse, we need to start by confronting ageism. By the World Health Organization's definition, ageism arises when age is used to categorize and divide people in ways that lead to harm, disadvantage, and injustice. Ageism is rarely recognized as the violation of human rights it is. Little by little, it dehumanizes older persons. From jokes about senior moments to referencing a silver tsunami, it's a quick slide to debating whether some lives are worth more than others during a pandemic. Ageism and how we think or don't think about older people has a drastic impact on the quality of care and services that we receive as we get older. Ageism negatively impacts a person's quality of life and increases social isolation and loneliness, which are high risk factors for elder abuse. The World Health Organization and the United Nations emphasize the importance of age-friendly communities, a supportive, age-inclusive community that promotes health, safety, and well-being across the life course leaves less room for abuse and violence to breed. We're currently leading a project with a group of partners to develop a pan-Canadian roadmap to increase the prevention of elder abuse. Thanks to funding from the Department of Justice Victims Fund, we will develop a guide with multiple entry points, which will allow each of us at individual, organizational, or governmental levels to play a role in preventing elder abuse. Our consultations point to a collaborative approach as a meaningful tool to support older people, and we hope to foster coordinated community response mechanisms and integrated teams that will connect policing, community, social, and health services. Building bridges through training that promote trauma-informed principles and focus on equity can help address additional barriers to safety that are facing underserved seniors, such as older women, especially older women of color, Indigenous, and LGBTQ+ seniors. Canada has shown increasing leadership in its approach to tackling gender-based violence. It's time to turn our attention to the needs of older citizens facing life-threatening abusive situations. This means providing adequate support and resources for research, direct services, and public education across Canada. Supporting innovative research and at the federal level would help address our knowledge gaps and propel the development of future policies and best practices. The sector of elder abuse prevention is a fragmented one. Not all provinces and territories have a dedicated organization or network, and funding varies between jurisdictions. The results are disparities in prevention and response capacity. A well-resourced infrastructure would support an efficient, coordinated approach to detection, prevention, and response. And with the right support from the Government of Canada, existing practice and knowledge communities could work in unison, ensuring that we can all age in health and safety with our rights protected and respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. We'll now go to the Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. Please go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, bonjour. Joining me today is our Director of Partnerships and Outreach, Rayanne Rideow. Thank you for inviting us to speak with you about elder abuse. But let me get straight to the point. We are now in a state of crisis. Our parents, siblings, neighbors, friends, and others within the community who have no one to turn to are facing unprecedented rates and increased risk of abuse, physical, psychological, sexual, and financial exploitation. Over the past year, call volumes to the 24-hour senior safety line have risen 250% in Ontario. 250%. Let that sink in. Many more are victims of neglect. The lockdown measures intended to curb the spread of the virus have only exacerbated those issues arising from isolation, translating into increased vulnerabilities to abuse. Here are but a few stories that we have heard each day. A woman forced by her family to live in an unheated garage with the windows darkened. A senior man lying alone in bed, covered in feces. A late resident in a Mississauga long-term care home robbed of her life savings by the person who abused their authority as her power of attorney. These are heartbreaking, yet all too common incidents of vicious abuse. This problem needs to be identified and it needs to be named. Elder abuse cannot be buried within other strategies and programs. Systemic issues require deliberate and systemic approaches. If we do not answer the call now, we might not get a second chance. So what can the federal government do to effectively combat elder abuse? It starts with one thing, prevention. First, the federal government should support the continued development and implementation of a national elder abuse strategy, one that includes diverse communities with a pan-Canadian awareness building campaign. People need to know how to recognize the signs, how to take appropriate action, and particularly in situations when someone is incapable of doing so for themselves. People need to know how to protect themselves and be able to access timely services. Second, the federal government should provide tethered funding to provinces and territories to support the execution of this national strategy. It is fundamental that the federal government leverage its ability to engage provinces in bilateral agreements to increase safety and well-being outcomes for seniors, no matter where they reside. Whether at the national, provincial, or local levels, community-based volunteer, nonprofit organizations such as the Canadian Network for Prevention of Elder Abuse, local area networks, and Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario need to be sustainably supported. In Ontario, where there were once 57 networks, we are now down to 30. We are on the front lines, but our capacity is dwindling. These organizations are best positioned to raise awareness through education and to provide localized and culturally appropriate responses related to elder abuse. Third, the federal government must invest in better data collection related to elder abuse. The Minister of Seniors' mandate letter confirms this. We need data for evidence-based decision-making to be able to tackle the issues with timely precision. To do so, the federal government should require federally funded and regulated agencies to collect disaggregated data on elder abuse and neglect and to report it. Integrate data collection requirements into future national standards for long-term care, and invest in research to better understand and respond to elder abuse and neglect. The federal government must also consider public policies through an intersectional lens that takes age into account. In fact, ageism is at the core of elder abuse. Demanding accountability from groups and individuals working with older populations is fair, but accountability needs to start with government. In politics, it is said that people regret the things they do not do. This is our opportunity to have no further regrets. The cost of not addressing elder abuse crisis in Canada is too high. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Hayek. Just before we go into our first round of questions, I'll just remind or ask Ms. Majowski, can you just double check if your headphone is selected in your audio settings? My understanding is that we're still getting some questionable audio from you. So just double check as we go into our first round. Madam Finley, you have 6 minutes as our first questioner. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here on this important topic. This is to the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. With respect to the federal budget and in particular data collection, an April 29th blog post on your organization's website notes the budget cites plans for better data collection and for improved access to justice in general, but makes no specific mention of elder abuse. This is a somewhat disappointing direction, as investing in better data collection and law enforcement related to elder abuse sorry, lost my train where I was going there. As investing in better data collection, law enforcement related to elder abuse features prominently in the mandate letters of the Ministers of Seniors, which has just been mentioned, and the Minister of Justice. Could you elaborate on this need for data? You've talked about research. I assume we're talking about the same thing, and what you would have liked to have seen in the federal budget to this end. You mentioned protection, response. Do you want to elaborate a little more?
Yes, well, I'm not sure if Kathy's sound is in the clear, so I'll take this one. Overall, we're facing a situation where we have extremely spotty data about elder abuse in general. The research is still scarce, and we have big gaps in terms of, for instance, interventions. What interventions work, what interventions don't work, or criminal justice, what is the actual impact of it on elder abuse occurrence and then on the victims? And that could go on. There's a whole list that we actually had compiled recently while working on our strategy. And it would help tremendously into shaping the way we think of elder abuse, the way we plan to address it, the policies and practices that we can disseminate further across the country if we had a fuller picture. I know this was something, as we mentioned in the blog post, in the statement, that was a priority for the Minister for Seniors, and we were really hoping to see a more specific mention of elder abuse, because as Marta Hayek was mentioning earlier in her speech, elder abuse is often, whether we're talking about direct services or any approaches quite often is folded in with other services, folded in with other approaches of other issues, and sort of gets a little forgotten in the mix. And we were really hoping for much more pointed mentions of it, though to be fair, we're still very happy to see
more specific identification.
Sorry, Madam Findlay, yes. I'm stopping your time. I just wanted to let Ms. Majowski know that her sound issue has been fixed. And Ms. Schopflen, your internet is coming in and out, so there's a bit of a breakage in what you're saying. Just wanted to flag that. Resuming time for you, Madam Findlay. Please go ahead.
See, I thought it was just me, Madam Chair. I know very well from my previous role as Minister of National Revenue that phishing calls and emails, criminals often pretending to be the CRA, they often target seniors. And I imagine this issue is particularly relevant right now, given that it's tax season, census week, and we're still in the midst of a pandemic. Could you speak, either of you, to this issue, how it's maybe evolved during the pandemic, whether there's anything the government can do to help, or more that can be done, whether it's amendments to the criminal code, greater enforcement of existing laws, education, or something else? I know this was a real issue and continuing issue, and just trying to make people aware. Very brief answer, but if you could address that. Ms. Majowski, maybe we can hear you now.
Is that a little bit better?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Perfect. So I can definitely speak to that. What has been compounded throughout the pandemic is the isolation that older adults face. Some older adults are connected to more resources than others, and we definitely see that older adults that are less connected are more likely to become targets of scams and fraud. As mentioned, I work as a registered nurse. I work in a community setting. Some of the older adults that I support, they don't have phones, they don't have access to technology, and they may or may not have family supports. And so they are a little bit more at risk. And so thankfully, I'm able to connect with them, and my team is able to connect with them when they come across concerning information. And we do provide health education. Obviously, prior to COVID, we were able to do kind of group education sessions in 55 plus buildings and in areas where seniors groups congregated. But that has changed as well. We cannot have group settings. We cannot have those information sessions. So our ability to connect to older adults with that information and with that education has also been limited by the pandemic and by COVID. So there's many things that impact.
Thank you. This is for Terry Lake. Good to see you again, Terry. I want to thank you and your members for caring for our seniors here in BC. It's obvious that you provide a lot of important care to a lot of our seniors, and ensuring their health, safety, and quality of life is very important to me. I see you're on an upcoming panel titled What Went Right, What Went Wrong, Seniors Care in COVID-19. So if you could briefly just tell this committee what you think went right and what went wrong in our care homes during the pandemic.
Well, thank you for the question. It deserves more than a 30-second response, but I think, as my comment suggested, the health human resource crisis that has been unaddressed for years is a key. But secondly, we focus too much on acute care and not the most vulnerable setting, which was long-term care. And this happened in province after province after province. We had empty hospitals, surgeries canceled, and we really did not see the acute care system stretched. Meanwhile, long-term care was struggling to access PPE, struggling to have enough people working there, struggling to get resources. And I would say that was the biggest single factor in our national failure to protect seniors in care.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We'll now go to MP Stéphane Lauzon for 6 minutes. Please go ahead.
Oui, merci à tous.
Thanks to all of you. You've given some excellent testimony. We have a very interesting panel with us. Mr. Lake, you often spoke about qualified staff for long-term care, and you piqued my curiosity. You said that the staff come from private and public institutions, and I was wondering what the role of the government was when it comes to training staff? And what steps can be taken to alleviate the shortage of staff?
The question, Monsieur Lison. In British Columbia, the curriculum of public and private institutions that train healthcare aides is certified by the provincial government. So there is a standard of quality that's important. I think putting healthcare aides into a professional college will increase the ability for continuing education and also, of course, addressing any issues of neglect or abuse. But the Conference Board of Canada says we need up to 200,000 new long-term care beds in the next couple of decades. And with that, of course, we are going to require far more healthcare aides or personal support workers, more LPNs, and more RNs. And the domestic supply in Canada will not be sufficient to meet this demand, which is why we really have been hopefully optimistic with the developments on the National Occupation Classification Code changes, which will allow people with less than a degree to be considered trained and skilled workers and have an easier path to permanent residency in Canada. Those changes are being implemented probably not for a year after the changes occur, and we really hope they will be implemented much, much sooner so that we can bring people into Canada that will be trained and will be ready to step into the workforce to care for our elders here in Canada. And we simply need far more than are available today, not only to deal with the growing population of baby boomers that will be coming into the system, but because we need to increase the number of hours of care per day to increase the level of care that our elders deserve.
Well, thank you very much for your answer. I just want to switch in English for now. Okay, one thing we are concerned about as a committee is preventing the tragedies report on by the military that you mentioned in your remarks. When they visit these long-term care homes, especially in provinces like Ontario and Quebec, maybe the situation in BC has been different, as you mentioned. In your view, what is important to consider firstly when establishing new offense and penalties in the criminal code related to elder abuse and neglect?
Well, I'm not sure that the current provisions are not sufficient, because neglecting or abusing elders is embedded in the criminal code. But the abuse and neglect that we saw, particularly in the first wave in the province of Ontario and Quebec, were due to insufficient staff available to look after these very, very vulnerable Canadians. And when so many staff fell sick to the virus, or many were afraid to come to work, we heard reports from the Canadian Armed Forces of 115 residents with only 3 staff members. And those 3 brave people that showed up to do their job, it just wasn't enough to keep people from being dehydrated, from not having the food they require, for not being toileted properly. And that's because Canada invests 30% less than other OECD countries in seniors' care. And so we've all known this for a while. I, as a provincial health minister, knew this. And the measures we took to try to address it were insufficient across the country. I think the one thing that COVID has shown us is that we need to address seniors' care in Canada, and we need to make the system much stronger than it is today. And so I'm hopeful that that will be one of the positive changes that occurs as a result of this pandemic.
Thanks for your answer. And this question is for all the witnesses who wants to answer this question, because it is a very important question about in the mandate letter of two minister and minister for seniors. La question est simple.
It's a simple question. Do you think data collection can make a big difference? And how will that be used? How will that help find solutions? be it for the employability, long-term care, or when it comes to reducing elder abuse?
Madame Ajek can answer this question.
Thank you, Monsieur Lauzon, for the question. The data collection is really fundamental. There is such a disparity in terms of what is being collected across the various provinces by various sectors and the partners that we work with. With standardized data, we will be better informed in terms of those policy decision making initiatives and to make things a bit more consistent across Canada. Having a community center that is 15 miles away from where a particular resident resides because there's nothing for them locally, that is a reason where the community did not react with the resources that are required where they are required.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Monsieur Lauzon. We'll now go to Monsieur Fortin for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for coming today. It's greatly appreciated. I heard Mr. Lake talk about his earlier experience as member of provincial parliament in BC, and you were Minister of Health. So I'm sure that he was concerned with this question for a number of years, and I'm sure he will be able to shed some light on some aspects of this situation. So I will start with you, Mr. Lake. I understood from what you said that there is a problem with staff. There's a shortage of staff in long-term care homes. I suspect that that problem exists in all provinces and probably in many countries as well. It's costly, it's not easy, etc. That is a concern for all of our legislative assemblies and the federal government. I'll put that aside for the time being, but let's look at another aspect. The federal government looks at the federal aspect, the federal jurisdiction side of this issue. Right now, we're wondering whether amendments should be made to the criminal code to better protect our seniors. You said correctly that there are already provisions in the criminal code on abuse, negligence, etc. So we're not going to repeat the same violations, if you like. But earlier on, some witnesses said that often when seniors are victims of abuse or mistreatment, the aggressor is a member of the family or someone they are close to, maybe a neighbor, for example. And the senior individual doesn't want the abuser to be, say, criminalized, but they want the abuse to end. In your experience and in your view, do you have any suggestions to make? How can you stop the abuse or mistreatment without necessarily taking a criminal approach to the problem?
That is an interesting question and one that's quite challenging. I would say that, when I talked about the professionalization of healthcare aides or personal support workers, you could include more training on elder abuse and recognizing situations in which family members may be taking advantage. We have situations quite frequently where pensions are raided by family members, and that leaves the elder in care unable to pay their co-payment of their care and hospitality fees, and obviously leaves them in a very dire situation. So I think training those who work closely at the bedside and interact with the families on a regular basis would be very helpful in preventing or at least spotting early cases of that type of abuse.
Merci, Monsieur Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. So training is important, I imagine, but to the extent that it does exist. Let's say there is a senior who said, my nephew made me sign all sorts of checks last week because he was going to pay for this, that, or the other thing. And then you recognize realize that that senior complains to some authority, what can be done? Yes, you can go and find the nephew and say, well, you have to reimburse your uncle, but you could also start some criminal proceedings. But couldn't something else be done? Couldn't there be some penalties if something like that happens? Yes, I agree that more training is required and you want to prevent the situation. But if there is a case of abuse, is there something that could be done that doesn't exist yet? Can something be put into place?
I would defer to other members of the panel. I think their expertise lies more in this area, Monsieur Fortin.
Merci, Monsieur Lake. Madame.
Thank you, Mr. Lake. Perhaps Ms. Majowski can answer.
So, Monsieur Fortin, what we see in the community setting is that in many cases, older adults do not want to report family or friends and do not want criminal proceedings, but they are dependent on the perpetrator for something, whether it be to help them get groceries, for transportation to a doctor's appointment, for tasks that allow them to continue living comfortably in the community. And they do care about the person that is helping them. What we've seen have a lot of success just from the work that I do is that we assist to put more resources in place so that older adult is no longer dependent on the person that is abusing them. They're able to access resources in the community, whether it be volunteers, social services, health services. Particularly during COVID, we've seen a wonderful uptick in these services and supports where they no longer have to be so dependent on the perpetrator, and they can go back to being family members without that extra complication of one depending on the other.
Okay. Merci, Madame Majowski. Merci, Madame le Président.
Thank you, Ms. Majowski. Thank you, Madam Chair.
We'll now go to Mr. Garrison for 6 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Garrison.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being with us today. I want to go back to Ms. Majowski, who talked about prevention. And I wonder whether you believe that strengthening criminal code provisions that would hold private care operators responsible for failures of care that result in injury or death of long-term care residents, do you think that this would help in terms of providing an incentive to avoid elder abuse in those homes?
I do. I do think that there needs to be more accountability when it is discovered that private care providers, even municipal care home providers, if they're not doing the job that our older adults deserve, there should be a level of accountability. Particularly, speaking for Manitoba, we do have an oversight. There is oversight from our provincial government for the long-term care facilities. There are certain standards that the long-term care facilities need to uphold. However, if a care facility in Manitoba does not meet those standards, that information has not been made public. It's not something that is shared. They are given chance after chance to rectify the situation, and sometimes they do. For as long as the oversight committee is keeping an eye on things, and then they no longer need to. So there are concerns. There are 100% concerns that the accountability is lacking in these care homes and these care providers.
Thank you very much. On the question of staffing and staffing levels, it would seem to me that if institutions had been properly staffed during COVID, they wouldn't have fallen into crisis so early or so deeply. And so while Mr. Lake's testimony seems to treat staffing as something that falls from the sky, it would seem to be that there's a problem. There was a problem here before COVID with inadequate staffing levels to provide adequate care. And is that your experience?
Absolutely. So I can speak both from professionally and personally. My grandmother is in one of the care homes that suffered a significant COVID outbreak. And we learned after the fact that they were staffed, even when there was outbreaks happening in other care homes in the city, they were staffed at pre-pandemic levels. I have worked in care homes. The pre-pandemic levels are woefully inadequate. The amount of time that staff have to spend with each resident is broken down to almost the millisecond. They are given very, very little time. There's no time for any sort of crises or any sort of variation from the routine, which makes staff very, very stressed. They're not able to perform the tasks that they know they should be doing. This has been an ongoing issue, and I don't think that the staff need to fall from the sky, but I do feel that there are long-term care facilities that chronically understaff and expect that volunteers and family members are going to fill in the gaps. And when we saw with COVID, when the volunteers and family members were no longer able to access the homes, there was a significant crisis already. We should not have to depend on volunteers and family members to be able to care for our older adults properly.
Thank you. I will turn to Mr. Lake since I have cited him. I'm curious about whether the BC Care Providers Association is doing work on establishing standards for itself as care providers and professionalization of its own organization. You've talked about BC Care Aids need to be professionalized, but does your organization work to establish standards of care that your members will deliver when providing long-term care?
Well, all of our members are contracted to the provincial government through health authorities, and they're very highly regulated. All inspections, for instance, of long-term care the reports are available on the health authority websites. We have patient care quality offices to whom families can go to if they feel there's an issue about care in their family's nursing home. On our independent living and home health side, we are actually starting an Assurity program, which does have a level of care, a level of standards that people have to meet. That's more on the independent living and private home health side, not the contracted long-term care side, because the regulations there are, as Minister, I can tell you, they're very stringent. And I think I would say that in British Columbia, we have probably the best organized system of care for seniors because we are so tied into regional health authorities for oversight, whether you are a health authority home or a contracted provider. There's that same level of regulation and care and hours of care that are legislated.
So what you're saying to us then as a committee is that we shouldn't wait for the providers to raise standards of care, that we will need to focus on regulations and perhaps national standards for healthcare rather than waiting for the providers to tackle these problems, that you're just going to wait with the current level of regulations.
Well, we have to remember that, seniors care in Canada is in almost all cases, publicly funded for their care component, not the hospitality component. So providers can only provide the level of care the governments are willing to invest in. And so when we talk about not being able to have staff or not being able to attract and retain staff, it's because Canada underinvests by about 30% in seniors care. So until and when we address that, we won't see improvements in raising the level of care through staffing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That concludes your time, Mr. Garrison. We'll now go into our second round of questions, starting with Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our witnesses for being with us today. I just want to start with Ms. Hayek and thank her for being here. And one of her comments that she meant, it stuck with me and it resonates. It's the regrets, the things that we do not do. And so it's important that we're doing this study, and we're here today to look towards all of you and your comments. I was wondering, in terms of the recent long-term care report in Ontario that was prepared and released on April 30th, if you had a chance to review that and any comments that you may have with regards to that.
If I may, through the chair, I'd like to defer this to our Director of Partnerships, Rayanne.
Okay.
Thank you. I haven't read the report entirely, but we do know that there is need for, the need for further training and education to the staff to identify. Even sometimes staff may not even recognize some of their actions may be considered abusive in nature in regards to that. And again, not working directly within that long-term care sector, but with my colleagues, Mr. Lake, recognizing the lack of staffing, and we knew that some of those shortages were evident prior to COVID as well, that is a necessary need that we need to implement in the future in terms of staffing, but also getting back to that with the national standards of training or national standards for long-term care is to integrate that training and education component and recognizing what their role and responsibility is in reporting when they do see these significant issues happening to other residents, either by other colleagues that they're working with, and that whistleblower protection, I think that other colleagues have mentioned in previous testimonials. Thank you.
Yeah, quickly, if I could, just to follow up on that with regards to other witnesses had talked about, under the federal criminal code, the notions and the requirements for maybe whistleblower protection and then endangerment codes as well, criminal endangerment, and just getting your thoughts on that and what you would think with regards to that, if you could.
So I would refer to our colleagues who have the expertise and legal background in regards to the criminal code amendments. I know Mr. Graham with his recommendations around the criminal endangerment, his recommendation around that. I know that is something that other colleagues have sort of supported in that, and looking at that again, as Krista James from the Canadian Centre for Elder Law indicated, in terms of looking at the investigation or research with what best practices would work, what other legislation is working within across borders as well, in terms of looking at best practices that we would implement in the future.
Excellent, thank you. I'm just going to build in. It seems to be kind of a consensus in some of the discussions here. It's on the whole issue of the staffing and needs in that area. And I know from the long-term care report that the province issued on April 30th, it talked in pages from 236 all the way to 239 about staffing and requirements there. Talked about the regulation of PSWs. I know the provincial government has committed $86 million, for example, devoted to providing free tuition to PSW students so that it could bring on stream 8,000 new PSW workers. So my question is, how long would that take to implement from today, for example, providing that to having those workers working in facilities?
Well, in British Columbia, and I think it's fairly similar across the country, it takes about 8 months to be certified as a healthcare assistant. So these programs are extremely important, and the sooner we start those, the better. We have a similar program in the province of British Columbia, but we simply don't have enough people living here in Canada to fill those roles. Already, the provincial government has hit a plateau in entrance to a totally free, paid-for program. So we need to have immigrants take those roles, and that's why we really need to work hard to bring people in to fill those gaps.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldinelli. We'll now go to Mr. Virani for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with Mr. Sarai, so I'll keep it fairly brief. I want to recognize, first of all, that this is a National Nursing Week, so thank you to all of the nurses that are doing this extremely important care, particularly Ms. Majewski. I know you're a registered nurse yourself, and I'm married to one. Secondly, I would just say that thank you for all of the work you're doing in commitment to this cause. We're very seized of the issue of standards. This has come up repeatedly, and with the issue of funding to support those standards. And that's why, as a government, between the fall economic statement and the current budget, we've committed about $4 billion in total to this sector alone. But I think what's important is that we also recognize the standards will by necessity still be breached. So I want to ask this question particularly to Ms. Hayek, because I don't think you've weighed in on it yet, about this criminal component. And we've heard from Mr. Lake on this. I've heard a little bit from Ms. Majewski about it. But if there is going to, one, do you feel, Ms. Hayek, that we need to improve the criminal standards for neglect of those who neglect those who are in care? And secondly, if so, do you appreciate or endorse what was suggested by Mr. Webb at the last panel? So over to you, Ms. Hayek.
Thank you, Mr. Virani. I would certainly endorse the position that many of my colleagues have taken. Again, we are in a crisis situation. There needs to be more accountability and there need to be consequences for bad behavior. People that don't adhere to the rules and whatever existing standards there are in place now have already demonstrated how without consequences, this will just continue. It will be exacerbated beyond just what the COVID environment has provided for us. So yes, there need to be consequences and they need to be worked into the criminal codes. I myself have no legal expertise, but I hear horrible stories every single day. Our responsibility as a society is to look after one senior at a time and make a difference in their quality of life.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hayek. I'll turn over my remaining time to Mr. Sarai. Thank you.
Thank you, Virani. My question's to Mr. Lake. Mr. Lake, good to see you here. I've grown up around old folks' homes all my life. My mother was a cook and one of my aunts were care aides and nurses aides in them. So, and I used to get babysat for 45 minutes to an hour between my parents' shifts. So I know a lot about it when I was in my younger years. And what I've heard from you is that the concern is there's a lack of funding is one, and the second is a lack of care aides and other staffers, an acute shortage here. What I would like to know is when a private care facility doesn't have the staff, do they still maintain the same amount of patients, or do they have to reduce the amount of patients to make sure the staff to staff to patient ratio is maintained?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Sarai. And our president, Ali Devji, has your same background. His family started a care home in Delta, and he's been there since he was about 10 weeks old. So he has that similar background. The contracted providers have to provide a number of hours of care per day. In British Columbia, currently is 3.36. And so they have to have the staff required to meet that standard of 3.36. It can be extremely challenging to find people to staff. We had a nursing home in the neighboring community of Merritt just this week announced that they are closing their long-term care home. And part of the reason for closing those 20 beds is they simply cannot recruit and retain staff in order to provide those hours of care. So it is an ongoing challenge, and so one that I think needs to be addressed very, very quickly.
And has there been any review provincially in regards to changing that proportion of funding that is there to adequately increase salaries of those that work there and therefore attract better talent? Whether that was when you were minister or the subsequent government, it's not a partisan issue. I'm just trying to find out.
No, absolutely. And we started raising hours of care when I was minister. That's continued under the current government. And to their credit, this current government in British Columbia has instituted wage leveling so that everyone essentially is getting paid the same wage for doing the same job. Benefits may vary from, contractor to health authorities, but that has largely been addressed, recognizing that we need to pay people a living wage and to attract people into this career. We must make it attractive because people that are in it are passionate, they're fulfilled, but they need to be paid better.
Anything quick on elder abuse that you've seen in your facilities that needs to be remedied quickly?
Well, the biggest, incident of elder abuse in our country was the lack of people to take care of our elders during a pandemic.
Thank you very much for that. I see that it is 1 o'clock, but I do have Monsieur Fortin and Mr. Garrison still remaining with 2.5 minutes each. So with members' permission, we'll go to Monsieur Fortin for your 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead, sir.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll try to be brief. There's one aspect that I would like to broach with our panelists. My question is for Ms. Schöpflin. With regard to protection of elders who do some whistleblowing, how are we going to protect them? There was talk of it. We're not quite sure what to do. It is a challenge. But also, how can we encourage the elders to actually denounce abuse? How can we make a situation whereby people are going to feel comfortable whistleblowing? Thank you very much. I will answer your question in French, if you don't mind. Well, when you think of the question of reporting a situation, when an elder wants to report something, you have to remember that there are often family ties, there are emotional ties that are going to stop them from doing so or limit them. One thing that we know is that sometimes there is also the question of being scared of alerting the police, because then it becomes something much more serious and much more concrete. The victim will think, if I want to backtrack afterwards, I can't do that because I will have already alerted the police. One thing that is certain is that before reporting something to authorities, an elder will talk to someone close to them, a friend, for example. A good approach would be to ensure that the public is well informed, so that if you are in a position where you see your uncle or anybody in a delicate situation, you have to know how to react. You have to know what the correct response could be. That would be a first step. It could reinforce the victim's confidence and help them move to the next stage, knowing that there's someone there who can help them. Another approach could be to focus a bit more on the aggressors and their relationship with the victim, and perhaps use some mediation. There could be a professional that's called in who could help to diffuse the situation before it gets worse. Those would be my suggestions. Yes, mediation is an excellent option. Thank you.
We'll now go to Mr. Garrison for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My last questions here will be to Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. We've certainly had some very disturbing news about the case that in at least 2 of the care homes where the Canadian military had to intervene, not only were there high levels of death among residents from COVID, but there were additional deaths resulting from the failure to provide necessities of life. And we've heard previous testimony about some kind of reluctance of both the coroner's office and the police to investigate these cases, and that there have never been any charges laid in these cases. So my question is that your experience, that there has been a reluctance in these institutional cases to fully investigate and that there have never been any charges that we know of?
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. The long-term care home environment is not something we have total penetration into. We are, as a community agency, responding to things mostly within the community. We are privy to some of the developments within long-term care. We have had an opportunity to read the various reports that have been put forward. But as far as the reluctance goes, I cannot personally speak to that.
Then can I ask the same question to the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse?
Well, a similar answer, but if I can speak a little anecdotally, older adults, when it comes to victims of abuse or neglect, whether professionally in long-term care settings or in community settings, service providers don't necessarily take the information as seriously as if the victim was younger. Whether that is related to ageism, whether that is related to this notion that older adults have lived a long life, and that it's a family matter, it's a private matter. Those are potential underlying issues that prevent not only people from coming forward, but from service providers and community organizations that are not trained in elder abuse prevention or not familiar with elder abuse and ageism to not respond in as fulsome of a way as if the victim was younger.
Thanks very much. I just want to thank the witnesses again for their testimony today, and also for those who shared difficult stories about the circumstances of individuals who have suffered elder abuse. I think it's very important for the committee to hear those stories, and I know some of them are very personal, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison, and thank you on behalf of the committee to all of the witnesses for your very compelling testimony. If there are clarifications or additional information you'd like to provide to the committee, please do send us in writing to Mr. Clerk via email so we can include them also in our deliberations. Thank you very much again. I just have two quick housekeeping items for members. Members, there was an opportunity, we had exhausted the witness list in terms of invitations, and there was a slot that had opened for Thursday. And I given the area of questioning, et cetera, that I'd seen over the past couple of meetings, I did invite Stats Canada department officials to come before us to answer some of the questions that I've heard multiple members ask. So that'll be on the 25th of May as one of our panelists. And just a quick reminder that at our next meeting, we'll be taking the last 30 minutes to talk about some of the draft instructions and recommendations for this report before we go into constituency week, so our analysts can have a bit of a head start in putting together the report. If you have any questions, please do get in touch with me or with Mr. Clerk. Thanks everyone, meeting adjourned.